Welcome to the Resolute Warrior Podcast by Resolute Men Ministries, where we equip men to activate a life of authentic character. A resolute warrior is purposefully minded, steadfast in character, a man who walks in humility with an unshakable faith. We interview men who are having an impact in the Christian arena, as well as discussing topics related to men from a biblical perspective. It's about real life with real challenges with real men. And now to today's podcast.
I'm Rob Billingham, host of the Resolute Warrior Podcast. It's my privilege to have on today's episode Kent Chevalier. Am I right? Is that how you say it, Kent?
That's how you say it, man.
Awesome. Pastor Kent served for 22 years as pastor in the local church and stepped out in 2019 to become the chaplain of the Pittsburgh Steelers through the Ministry of Athletes in Action. He is a Pittsburgh native, a graduate of Geneva College and Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Kent partners with Lionshare as a national speaker and VP of the board. He loves serving and encouraging individuals, businesses, ministries with his wife, Erica, as part of their new ministry adventure. Team Chevalier, he values the most. I know that as a husband and as a father, he has 3 daughters. Is that right, Ken?
Right.
3 daughters.
Call them the pink life, man.
What's that?
I call them the pink life.
There you go, man. We call this also you're in the stress bubble, but you know what? There's light at the end of the tunnel, man. You're going to make it.
That's right. I love it.
Hey, Kent, welcome again to the Resolute Warrior Podcast.
Hey, Rob, thank you for having me on, man. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. Hey, we like to have a little fun to kind of get to know the guys as we interview them.
Sure.
So I call this the triple play round. So you ready for it?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right, man. So what's your favorite place of all places you've ever traveled?
So, man, I would have to say I've been on I haven't traveled much for pleasure, man. You know, being a youth pastor and then pastor, haven't been able to see the world, so to speak. But man, when we've gone on mission trips, I would say that my favorite place that I've been is El Salvador, San Salvador, El Salvador. I've been back there now 5 times. Absolutely love it. Love that country. And there's a special place in my heart there. My wife and I both, man, we love El Salvador. That's
awesome. So have you gone there multiple times or?
Yeah. Been back there. Erica, my wife, her brother and his wife are full-time missionaries there. But we had been going to El Salvador even before they went there. And so now that they're there, we go back to see them and we do work with them. It's called Mission to El Salvador. They have an incredible ministry to the homeless who are there. They're working with women who have been trafficked there. So just incredible ministry that they're doing right on the streets of San Salvador.
Well, that's awesome stuff you're doing, man. That's great. And it's, that's one thing I haven't done yet is a mission trip, but I think I'm going to have to step out of my comfort zone and do that, brother.
I love it, man. It's one of when you stretch like that and you allow yourself to be in something like that, God does something special in both parties, you and the people that you're serving.
You always hear that, you're the one being blessed as you serve. So that's awesome. Right. So what's your favorite movie all time? It could be a guy movie, whatever, man.
Dude. So I had to go Gladiator. Russell Crowe, man. Are you not entertained? Right? I absolutely love. There's so many great one-liners in that movie, and it's just something that I, grew up. It was one of those movies that I connected with. Russell Crowe, great actor.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. That is a solid movie. So, if you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Yeah, dude. I was thinking about this question last night when you sent me the question. I was like, all right. I think right away my head went, I would love to learn like graphics, design, website stuff, man. I'm not exactly sure why, but man, that is something that I've been getting into, social media stuff. And so if I could master that, I would love to do something with digital media. That'd be incredible.
I'll tell you what, once you get that down, let me know and I'll hire you because I need that support, brother.
Sounds good. Same here, man. Same here.
You got it. Hey, so we're going to get into your life a little bit, man. I know, you do a lot of things. As I went through your story, it kind of intrigued me how you got and where you are today. So I would love to hear, before we get into your life as a chaplain, but share a little bit about your family, yourself, and some hobbies you enjoy.
Yeah, man. So Erica and I, we met at college, Geneva College in Western PA. And all 4 years of school, we dated. 2 weeks after college, we got married, man. And so we've been married now for 21 years. And she's amazing. We partnered together as chaplains of the Steelers. So absolutely love doing ministry with her. And then together we have 3 daughters. Maddie's 18, Kalea is 16, Ainsley is 12, and even my dog is a girl, man. So, you know, I just call them the pink life, and I love being a part of that. And then I've been a pastor 22 years. 23 now, crazy. And 10 of those years as a youth pastor, and then the last 13 as a pastor to adults. And I've been a part of a great church in Pittsburgh, serving there, Northway Christian Community, multi-site church in Pittsburgh. And I've just loved being a part of that before I jumped out into this new adventure. Northway's still our church home, as we are now embarking on Team Chevalier, Erica and I together, serving the Pittsburgh Steelers this way. So
yeah, that's awesome, man. I do see you put that hashtag out there a lot, Team Chevalier, man. So it's really cool, man. And you know, and there is a blessing being a father of daughters, you know. So one thing I tell these guys, every guy I interview, man, don't, and I'm sure you're doing this as a dad, don't stop dating your daughter, man. You know, my daughter is married and is 28 years old, and it wasn't too long before all this COVID hit. We were going out still on dates. So, man, keep doing it.
Yeah, and I'm learning that, you know, each daughter is different. So every date has to look different. So you can't just cookie cutter with each of them. So I'm learning how to do that.
Good, man. Good stuff. So can you share a little bit about your testimony? I want to hear a little bit about your story and how God has led you to Athletes in Action.
Yeah, man. I played every sport possible that I could in high school. And I grew up in the church simultaneously. My parents deeply involved in our church. And so sometimes, man, I'm not even joking, we would be at that building like 5 days out of the week. And I was just, my junior high, starting to get into high school, I started to like, man, I don't want to be here. Like, this is too much. I saw too much, if you know what I mean. And I started to rebel pretty good in high school, did some things that I'm not proud of. And there's a portion of my story where, man, I just walked away from the church. Now, I'll say it this way. I didn't walk away from Jesus. I didn't walk away from God. It was the church that I saw a lot of stuff that I didn't want to be a part of. And but, you know, I think all of us have the tendency towards hypocrisy. And, you know, I was the worst of them all, but I didn't see it at the time. And so in high school, man, got into the locker room scene, did some things I'm not proud of, and graduated from high school with all of my buddies getting to go to the colleges that they wanted to, playing the sports that they wanted to. And I didn't get that, man. And so I kind of graduated high school as a bitter guy, like angry young man. And my parents, they made sure that I stayed connected to the youth group, even though I didn't want to be there. Like, they forced me to go. In hindsight, I'm really grateful for that. But at the time, I was just really mad. And so I graduated from high school, and they made me go to this summer camp with our church. I didn't want to be there because none of my buddies were going to be there. They were off, you know, at like football camp at their colleges, things like this. And it was there because I didn't have any of my buddies like distracting me. You know, I didn't have anybody around. I was actually paying attention to the speakers, you know. Wow. And it seemed like everyone who got up on that stage, every person, was speaking directly to me. I even thought, like, to myself, did my parents like tell them my story? Because they, you know, at the end, I'll just never forget, Thursday night in Orlando, Florida was where we were. And the guy basically said, there's somebody here who's bitter, who's angry, who's upset at all the circumstances. And I'm like looking around going, like, how does he know? You know? And he said, the only place that you're going to find that fulfillment is in Jesus Christ.
Mm.
It was there Thursday night in Orlando, that 1995, that I gave my life to Christ as a 17-year-old. And my life from that point, you know, it's not been perfect. I'm not in any way. I've made mistakes, but I have never looked back from following Jesus. I haven't done that perfectly, and there's been many bumps along the road, but that 17-year-old kid, when I surrendered my life to Jesus, man, my parents saw the difference. People that I went to high school saw the difference. God was doing a new work in me. And so that's a little bit of my story of how I came to Christ.
Wow, that's awesome, man. I mean, that's quite the testimony, because a lot of times, you know, like you said, you know, it could have pushed you out even further, man. I mean, like being in a youth group. I did youth ministry for 13 years, and
Okay, yeah.
so I can kind of relate to seeing some of those stories. But I mean, to have that foresight to see that, hey, are they speaking to me? Is this guy speaking to me? To have your heart such prepared, you know, because a lot of guys, they'll just check out and shut down. So
That's right.
that's awesome, man, that you allowed God to speak through you. So how did that all lead you to be part of Athletes in Action?
Yeah. So, you know, my freshman year of college, I played baseball, and I loved baseball. I just love sports, man. And something happened that freshman year where God was just changing my heart and giving and putting a new desire in me, that the sport that I grew up loving the most, it began to just, it doesn't have that same oomph that it once had in me. And so I eventually met a guy who began to disciple me, and he invited me to be a part of his student ministry, and he gave me a shot to lead a small group of 6th grade guys, you know, and he gave me my first shot to give a sermon, and I just started to fall in love. I know it now that God was kind of wooing me into a calling of ministry, to lay down the sport and to pick up the calling of ministry. And then fast forward then, where I think that as a pastor of 22 years, about, I would say 3 years ago in my life, I noticed that something changed in me. Like, my role at the church didn't change. I was still the campus pastor. I love my church, but something was changing in me. And I had felt that before, and I was a little bit hesitant to chase it. But then a guy by the name of Vance McDonald was traded from the San Francisco 49ers to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he started attending the church where I was a pastor. And he made a beeline for me after the first service that he attended. And he said, man, I'd love to grab coffee. And that's sort of like, I always joke that that's kind of my spiritual gift, coffee and conversation, you know. And so he and I, we went out to coffee, and that's where he shared with me that the Steelers didn't have a chaplain. And something jumped in me. I like to call it my knower. I just knew in my knower that God was up to something. And I didn't pursue it because I've learned my lesson that sometimes you jump too soon, right? And but Vance and I started in a relationship of just, you know, mentoring. You know, we'd go out to coffee, we'd talk about life, and we'd talk about him being a dad and a father, or a husband, and all of those things led to a discipleship relationship. And it was there that I felt like he was dropping hints that he kept saying, like, man, I wish that the Steelers had a chaplain, that we could do something like this in the locker room. And every time he shared it as like a prayer request, I felt something jump inside of me. So I eventually got up the courage to ask him. And he said, I was hoping that you would ask, kind of thing. And he introduced me to Coach Tomlin. And then, long story short, man, he introduced me to Athletes in Action. And I just preached a message yesterday telling this story of, man, to leave a full-time salary to come over to Athletes in Action, where you have to raise your full-time salary, all your benefits, all your ministry budget. I just said, I've got 3 daughters. I've got college right in the face, man. I've got 3 weddings, hopefully in the future. And I'm going, God, you got to be kidding me. Like, this is nuts. I don't want to be a full-time missionary. But he took us to school, and he basically said, you've been preaching a good game for the last 25 years. Now it's time for you to put your family, your feet where your mouth has been all these years.
Wow.
See, I was trusting in a paycheck. I was trusting in a position. I was trusting in me to provide for myself. And God just sort of, was taking me to school of where do you really place your trust, Kent? And man, we stepped out and we did it afraid. And quite honestly, we're still afraid. We're trusting God with everything. And, God's been so faithful time and time again through the ministry of Athletes in Action. So that's sort of how things got started and how I stumbled kind of backwards into this NFL chaplain role.
Man, that's an awesome testimony you shared there in regards to how that shifted over into Athletes in Action. And you know what I kept hearing as you were sharing that is that you took from taking your identity and what you did, because you're saying, the provisions, how am I going to provide for my family? And you put your trust in God, and he showed you a whole new identity within him.
Right.
So that's a pretty amazing story. So let's talk about your role now as the chaplain of the Pittsburgh Steelers. What I find interesting, Kent, is, and I love this, man, because my wife and I love doing ministry together when we have those opportunities, is that your wife's part of that team.
Yeah.
So I would love you just kind of like talk a little bit about that. What's that look like, your responsibilities in that position and her responsibilities?
Yeah. See, what lit me up the most is when I met with Coach Tomlin, and he said, dude, I'm looking for a local Pittsburgh couple who can be the pastor to this team. And so I just vividly remember it. He held up his hand and he said, this is the expectation of the role. And he said, I want Bible studies for the players. I want Bible studies for the coaches. I want all the chapels to be taken care of. Either speaking or finding, speakers for the chapels. And I want this guy to have a couples ministry with his wife, with the ladies of the organization, like the couples of the organization. And then I want this guy at training camp to lead Bible studies every morning for these guys. And then as we got into more conversation, he said, I would love, it's not an expectation, but I would love if this chaplain's wife could do the same thing for the coaches' wives. If the chaplain's wife could do the same thing with the players' wives and girlfriends, to run Bible studies. And that just lit us up because, like you said, man, I love doing ministry with my wife. We're partners together. That's why we sort of call ourselves Team Chevalier, because we feel like not only are we a team, but we feel like we're supposed to team with other ministries, churches, organizations in the Pittsburgh area to do great things for God. We want to team with them in that way. So that's kind of an idea of what we do as chaplains. The thing that Erica and I kind of probably say the most is that we feel like our ministry is this. We have the ministry of availability. Like we're here, not just for the players of this team, like we're here to come alongside, to love on, to listen to counsel the players and their families, coaches and their families, the staff, the organization of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We just want them to know that we're here. We love them. No strings attached. We're here to serve you. And so that's kind of how we see it, is that we have the ministry of availability to the team.
That's great, man. So, hey, like I said, man, when I interview you guys, I dive in to get to know you a little bit. So I did a little research. I read something that you had put out there. I don't know. It was probably on your website, maybe with Athletes in Action, but you put in there something that really stood out to me. That you said when you go into the Steelers facility, that becomes the church. In other words, the walls don't make the building don't make the church. It's the people, right? So church service begins when you enter that facility and you talk to the staff, you talk to the support systems, you talk to the players, whatever it may be. You said that becomes the church. Is that correct?
Yeah, man. So as a pastor for 22 years in the local church, like most of the time when we think church, we think building with a steeple. And obviously the case that Jesus made as he was sending out the church, the people, not the steeple, right? And so I feel like every time that I'm a guest in the Steelers facility, that wherever my feet go, the presence of God goes with me. And it doesn't matter where you do church, right? It can be around in the locker room. It can be in a conference room. It can be in my basement. That Erica and I, as the church, man, we feel like the Steelers organization is our parish, if you will. And that we just want to love these people. Like, we don't want anything from them. Like, they need to know that we're here to serve them, to love them well, and their families, no matter what. And so we feel like we approach it in the sense that the Steelers organization is our church that God has called us to shepherd. So we love it, and what a privilege it is, man.
That's amazing. So what I love to hear now is, I'm sure, as being a chaplain, I know you're new into this, man, but I'm sure you've probably experienced it some, even, pre-COVID, but what have been some of the blessings that you saw? Also, what have been some of the challenges that you've witnessed as well? It could be with yourself. It could be with just, you don't have to get into specifics about individuals, but some of the circumstances that you had to deal with.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with maybe some of the things that were tough, right? The NFL is a business at the end of the day. And I was not, as a fan of NFL football, I grew up in Pittsburgh, man. I love the Steelers. You would not hear, as a fan, the ins and outs of the trades that go on behind the scenes, how this guy would be released and, this guy would come on. And given the unprecedented season that the Steelers faced last, season, every week there was a trade. Every week there was a release, multiple releases. And so just when you're investing in a guy, he finds out on Twitter sometimes that he's been traded, and boom, he's on a plane that night. And you're like, I didn't even get to say goodbye. Being a relational guy and not having the opportunity to say goodbye to a guy, or, man, we send you kind of thing, that was very difficult. The business side of the NFL, like watching as guys try to navigate that business. And if they are young men trying to follow Jesus, trying to do that well, it's extremely difficult to do that when, boom, one day they might be here and one day, the next. So that's one of the difficulties that I saw. For me, some of the blessings that I saw, man, I'll just tell this story. One of the chapels, I preached Jesus and how he was baptized, how he was lining himself up with the community of God and being baptized by John the Baptist, and this incredible moment that took place. And I just said, you know what, guys, there are some of you that you've never gone public with your faith in Jesus Christ, and I challenge you to be baptized. That next morning, dude, I baptized 2 guys in the hotel pool. It was awesome. There were some other guys who wanted to do it, but they wanted their wives to be involved or their families to be a part of that. So last season, I was able to baptize 4 guys and one of the couples of the Steelers. And man, for Erica and me, that was probably the highlight, being able to baptize that couple in the pool. It was absolutely amazing. Watching guys, another thing, just watching guys like begin to go public with their faith and own it on that platform. That's a risk for these guys to do it, but watching a few of them kind of go for it. And for me, another challenge would say when those guys do that and they speak publicly about their faith, they get crushed. They also get applauded on this side, but they get crushed on another side. So when they go public, they receive persecution in ways that I was not ready for. So having to walk them through that has been a challenge and a blessing at the same time, because with persecution comes growth. And so that's been a great thing for us to be a part of. And then a blessing for me personally is to do ministry with my wife with this incredible organization. Huge blessing for us together.
That's great. That's great stuff. So like I told you earlier before we started this podcast, I'm an Eagles fan. So there was in
I won't,
2013. What's
hold
that?
that against you.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And in 2013, they kind of went through the same situation when Carson Wentz got there and Trey Burton. These guys, they're very open about their faith, and it sounds similar to what I'm hearing from you. Is it's starting to gain some steam and some growth that hopefully that the guys that you are ministering to are going to kind of pass that torch on to somebody next to them, and it's just going to expand.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's kind of what's going on with you,
Yeah,
man.
man. And that's what I'm praying for. And that's, I inherited a spiritual legacy at the Steelers organization. I go back all the way to one of the earliest chaplains in the NFL. His name's Hollis Half. He happens to still be in Pittsburgh. He happens to be a friend of mine, a pastor straight down the street. And to build upon the legacy that he began, this is back in like the late 70s, early 80s teams. The amazing things that Tony Dungy started at the Steelers. Dude, I'm inheriting a legacy of God doing some amazing things. And we see our part as coming alongside that legacy. Let's build upon it and see what God's going to do in Steelers Nation to make his name famous, not the Steelers. Right? We want to make God's name famous in this city, more famous than the Steelers.
Well said, brother. Well said. And you nailed it, and to kind of take that legacy forward where you're at, where Tony left off and the chaplains before you and after him, and just taking the next step further, man. So that's great. I want to dive into your past a little bit in regards to you being a campus pastor.
Sure, yeah.
With Northway Community. I guess it was at their Wexford site.
Yeah.
I heard some stories about this, man, and just kind of, I'm just curious because like I said, I dived into some of your stuff, and I want you to share what God taught you during that season that led you where you are today, because that was pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, man. So Northway is still our home church. They have sent us and commissioned us as now what they call city mission partners, and so it's a privilege to serve in that way with Northway. But yeah, I came to Northway 13 years ago, and God had done something so radical in the life of Northway that their original campus, the Wexford campus, that God kind of breathed a new idea onto them about 15 years ago. Instead of building a much larger, massive sanctuary in the North Hills of Pittsburgh and basically say to Pittsburgh, like, come to us, they decided to now plant campuses around the city and the region of Pittsburgh. And so I came in very early on in that as they were planting these campuses. And I've always served at the Wexford campus for the last 13 years. I started out leading worship back when I had hair and cool glasses, things like, but served an incredible community of people right within the Wexford campus. And then when there was a leadership transition, Pastor Jay, our founder, he transitioned out of that lead pastor role, and a guy by the name of Scott Stevens, who's been a mentor to me for 25 years, he stepped into the lead pastor role, and he asked me to become the Wexford campus pastor, that original location. And now Northway is 7 locations across the region of Pittsburgh with an 8th campus, if you will, online because of COVID now. And so God's been doing an incredible thing in the history of Northway, teaming and partnering with other churches in the city. I've always loved that about Northway, man, trying to, get together with other churches. And so one of the things that I learned from coming on staff to then leading staff was how do I want to say this? God qualifies the called. He doesn't call the qualified.
That's right.
And I know that's a neat saying or whatever that I've heard in the past, but like it was true in my life, dude. I wasn't ready to become the campus pastor, to have 30 staff underneath me. I wasn't ready to shepherd like 2,500 people, but God stretched my faith in ways that I didn't even know that I needed to be stretched. A mentor of mine, he called it a stretch opportunity, and God sure he stretched me big time. And he taught me that it's important to have people around you who are constantly speaking life into you, but you don't want to surround yourself with just yes people.
That's right.
You want to surround and build a team of people who will actually tell you the truth, you know? And so in this journey to become the NFL chaplain, like the last 3 years, feeling that holy discontent inside of me, I thought I was crazy because, dude, I had a great position. I mean, I was the Wexford campus pastor, original campus, and like I was on the teaching team and I loved it. But I think a lesson was, okay, Kent, are you willing to lay this down, all of it, to just follow me, no matter what the cost? And that holy discontent, I think one of the big lessons was I have to wait on God's timing. You know, I think a huge lesson that I've learned from one of my mentors is he said, Kent, God's direction is just as important. Excuse me, I'll say it this way. God's timing is just as important as his direction. See, I knew that God was doing something inside of me, but his timing is absolutely important. And before I knew that I was like 20 years ago, I wanted to do something. And so I just reached at the first thing. And that's not always what God has for us. His timing is as important as his direction. So I think that's a major lesson that I learned jumping into this.
Yeah. And you're right. God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And that's a lesson I had to learn in myself. A good friend taught me that, like, well, I'm not ready yet, man. He goes, it don't matter if you're ready.
Right.
God, it's almost like Abraham, where he's telling Abraham, to step out in faith. He said, go to the land that I will show you. Not saying here's the land and here's the layout and this is how you get there.
That's right. Here's the strategic plan, the 10-year vision. Yeah.
Yes. A lot of guys want that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, hey, I want to talk about, this support and serving ministry that you're connected with, the Trucks of Hope ministry.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're connected with that, with the Steelers organization, and why is that important to you and important to the guys that are part of that?
Yeah. So, Vance McDonald is a big part of our story. God using him to get us to be with Athletes in Action in the chaplain role. Well, Vance is very passionate, he and his wife, Kendi, about Convoy of Hope, a great international ministry, probably most well known for their disaster relief work around the globe. But there's so much more than that. And when COVID hit, Convoy of Hope had a goal of 10 million meals across America. Well, they blew past that goal very quickly. And as a part of that, Vance and Kendi and a few other people on the team, we got very excited about how could we serve Pittsburgh? How could we bring hope when it's needed most to the region of Pittsburgh? And so we got together and we talked about a vision of what if we joined with Convoy and we did these trucks of hope, 5 trucks over the next 5 months that would feed 5,000 families. And that's 250,000 pounds of food and, like hygiene supplies. And so we're in the middle of this project right now. We had our first one that was the first Truck of Hope was at Heinz Field, and we partnered with United Way, and the Steelers kind of owned that one. Vance and the McDonald's and the Roethlisbergers got in on this, and man, they did an incredible job with the first truck. Now we're heading to a place called Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where Ashley Roethlisberger, that's her hometown. And that town's been hit hard by COVID. And we're partnering with ministries there to bring a second Truck of Hope. And that will happen next week, July 22. And dude, check out this narrative. So Vance and Kendi, they are making their forever home over in the Ligonier Latrobe Latrobe area of Pennsylvania. And that's where Steelers always host their training camp at St. Vincent College. And when training camp got canceled because of COVID, and we couldn't go there, the training camp couldn't be held there, our group, like the Trucks of Hope core team, we thought, you know what? Because the Steelers can't go there, Vance and Kendi are already there. Let's bring a Truck of Hope to Latrobe. And that story has been incredible, partnering with a great ministry called City Kids out that way, and with St. Vincent College, and doing an incredible feeding of 1,000 people out that way, partnering with local organizations. And I just love the narrative that even though the Steelers can't be there, we're still bringing a Truck of Hope out that way. And then we're praying about the, September and October, end of October locations of where those 4th and 5th trucks will end up becoming. So, man, if anybody on here is wondering about it and wondering about Convoy of Hope and everything, go to trucksofhope.com and you'll be able to see kind of what it is that we're doing. It'll link you to Convoy of Hope and all that they do with incredible ministry. Vance and Kendi have introduced it to the city of Pittsburgh. And so we're just kind of getting in and like we said, like we want to be alongsiders. And so we're just supporting them in the ministry that they want to do and getting behind the vision that they have to bring Convoy of Hope to Pittsburgh. So we love partnering with them. That's
great. It sounds like it's really, gaining some traction, no pun intended, but that's a good thing, man. And so we'll talk more about it at the end, but so there'll be opportunities for guys to help donate and things like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that we need is the funding. Like there's a big campaign to raise all this money to bring these Trucks of Hope, but then people can volunteer as a part of the ones who are handing out and unpacking these massive pallets that come off of the trucks and things like that, and then distributing the food to people. Right now, because of COVID, we have to do it in a social distanced manner with masks on and all of that. But our hope is maybe that'll lift and we can do more in-person ministry with people as they come to get the food and the need, the supplies. So, man,
that's amazing stuff you guys are doing. It's funny, we always hear about athletes and the money they're making and everything like that, but you never really hear much about how much they're putting back out into the community, the resources that they're putting out there, and they're really having those impacts,
Absolutely. Yeah, these guys, I love how they are leveraging the platform that God has given to them to do incredible ministry, to bring hope to the region of Pittsburgh. Proud of these guys for doing that. They don't have to. Many guys don't, right? But I love when guys understand the responsibility of the platform that they've been given and they're leveraging it to do God's work. I love it.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So kind of shifting gears a little bit. So as you know, this podcast is called The Resolute Warrior. So we want guys to be inspired to see that resolute warrior within themselves. And they can hear stories and testimonies of men like yourself who are having an impact and influence in the Christian arena. With that said, there's usually battles one has to face that help shape them, prepare them, and test that inner strength. Has there been some obstacles in your life that you faced that's tested the warrior within you? And if so, how did you rise above it, and how did that outcome come out for you?
Yeah, man. I think I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of guys, depending on how they grow up, I think a lot of guys deal with insecurity, and it might be masked in very different ways. But I think at the underlying core, there's a lot of guys who struggle with being insecure, and I think it's captured in this phrase that I'm not good enough. I think that's something that I have battled in my particular life. Even though God has constantly seemed to put me in these like positions where he's like stretching me and pushing me, and he believes in me, but I have a hard time sometimes believing in myself. And I think that goes way back to when I was in elementary and junior high, and some of the things that I believed about myself because of some of the deep wounds. Elementary kids and junior high kids can be brutal to each other. I think that, especially in the sports world, it's a performance based. And if you're not a part of the starting crew, that you begin to question, I'm not good enough for this. I remember getting cut by the travel team my 6th grade year. And it came down to me and another guy making the team, and I didn't make the team. That has stuck with me ever since, that I wasn't good enough to make that team. I think if guys are man enough to admit and look back into your childhood and we all have daddy wounds. We all have, I think if we're man enough to admit that stuff, that's the beginning of healing. But if dudes are too insecure to actually go there and to look deep inside and to do some retrospect, looking on the inside, if we don't go there, we're going to end up leading out of that insecurity and believing the lies of the enemy of our souls, telling us that we're not good enough. You're a joke to think that you could ever have a position like that. Who would even give you the time of day to listen to you? The lies of the enemy combat, obviously, what God tells us, that he's enough, that we are worthy in Christ to be the bearer of his son's name, and to battle those lies with the truth of who God tells us that we are. So I think, for me, insecurity, and I've had to work at a kind of like a programmatic way to silence the voice of the culture, like people, even like fans, like telling me that I'm awesome, but then the next day, if I do something they don't like, man, they'll tear me down, And so silencing the voice of those people, silencing my own voice, and silencing the voice of the enemy of my soul. When I silence those three, then the only voice that's left is the voice of my Creator, the one who made me, the one who knows me, and him speaking truth into my life. And so I've had to practice that almost as a religious routine on a daily basis, to silence all of those voices, to hear God only, and to dial into that, because that will battle, because I realize that I am secure in him, that I do not have to perform for his favor, that Jesus has done that to qualify me as worthy to be called a son of God. And when I go with that, instead of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, which is the lie of the enemy, which is the lie of the culture, if I go with that voice that God has given to me and the authority that God has given to me, man, I can battle that. But it's a daily, no joke, sometimes minute by minute battle.
I was going to say, brother, it's like a minute by minute battle. And I love what you said, that, like dialing out the noises within yourself, dialing out the negativities that surround you, and dialing in to what Christ is saying. Because, with the social media platform, with radio, television, just even in our own homes, we're bombarded with information, and not all of it's good. And just to be intentional about shutting that out is a challenge for most men. Would you agree?
Absolutely, man. I think it's one of the biggest things in our culture today, because you don't know who to believe anymore. You don't know which narrative is actually true, And so if we cannot hear the voice of God, if we've never developed that discipline to actually know the voice of God, Jesus said that his sheep, his people, will know his voice. Do we know his voice? And that's what I had to develop, that discipline to battle the insecurity. Because if as men, if we don't battle that with the voice of God, dude, we're gonna fall into temptation. We're gonna fall into those lies. We're gonna believe our fans and our foes, and that's where we're gonna get our identity from. And it won't work, because that's not who we are. God tells us who we are.
Well said. Well said. So taking that a next step further, as men, we're called to live for something bigger than ourselves. It's obvious where you're at right now. It took a leap of faith, right? So you stepped into AIA, diving in, raising your own funds. You got this young family. You just did not do that on your own merit. Something within you called you to something bigger. So God has given you this passion that drives you. What is that passion that drove you, that dives deep in your inner core to take such a bold step?
Yeah. And if I could kind of minimize it into one word, my passion is discipleship. Like if you ask anybody who knows me, I eat, drink, sleep discipleship. And what I mean by discipleship is that the people that God bring around you, right? That you would, there's a definition that I use. It's discipling those that God brings around you in the ways, in the character, and in the mission of Jesus. And then expecting them to do the exact same thing, right? So athletes in action, to win people with the gospel message, the hope of the world, to build them up as disciples of Jesus, and then to send them out to do it again, rinse and repeat, right? I mean, that's the model that Jesus gave to us. And so I have given my entire life to discipleship, coming alongside the guys. For me, the way that I've always done, it seems like there's guys that sort of get attracted to me and they're just sort of there. And God's intentionally bringing them around me. And so I've just always, hey, I'm going to give my life to you guys. Let's do life together. Let's talk about the character, the ways, the mission of Jesus, and let's get in behind him, our leader, and then let's do it again. So I believe in that multiplication principle that Jesus taught us. By investing in a few, the message multiplies. Right. So I've given my entire ministry. At first I didn't even know that that's what it was called, but somebody did that for me. And so I then turned around and did it for others. And now it's just a way of life, and so that I've given my life to discipleship.
That's awesome. So it's funny, man, because I'm a huge believer in that. And God gave me this vision, this tagline, if you will, for this ministry of Resolute Men. And that is, effective discipleship begins with intentional relationships.
Huge.
You can't, if you don't build that relationship piece, I think that's where a lot of churches or even other ministries fail, is we try to force guys into a program.
Yeah.
And it's evident that if guys are walking up to you, they see you approachable, for one. They see that availability that you were talking about earlier. But what they see is a guy who wants that relationship first. Yeah. And that's the huge element, man. So you're on the right track with that, man.
And I think you speak of programs. I'm not a how do I want to say this? Like, I'm not a poo-pooer of programs. I believe it's all about the relationships within those programs. And you cannot microwave discipleship. Discipleship to me is a slow crock pot of relationships over time and intentionality in the scriptures, serving together, doing life together, breaking bread together. Hey, come and see how I raise my kids. Get up close and see, man, I got struggles in my marriage just like you do. How do we handle that? That's discipleship. It's all about intentional relationships. But if it just stops at the way that I do it, man, we've got to constantly, intentionally point people to Jesus. He's the leader. Right. It shouldn't be about how I do things. I'm going to fall short. Do not look at me. Let's all look at Jesus together and do it intentionally in relationship. So good, man. Yeah,
that's all, man. You're on point with that. So I also want to talk a little bit about, how men influence their families, right? And that younger generation around us. There's a quote I heard, I want to share it with you, from James Baldwin. It says, that I read the other day, it says this: our youth have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them, which is huge. So we as men are daily influencing kids, that younger generation, could be our grandkids, whatever it may be, with our actions, whether we realize it or not. What steps or parameters do you set in your own personal life that could help that guy who may be listening today to live the best version of himself to represent that Christ-like character?
Yeah. And if I could speak to that quote for 1 second, I have found that the 20-something generation, and sometimes we get a bad rap because we like to, categorize generations and we pit them against each other. I think it's always been a 20-something issue that you feel like you know it all. And so you don't need to ask the older generations, right? And I also think that it's a point of pride for some of the older generations to say that young whippersnapper, he needs to stop doing what he's doing. No, we need to realize that we need each other, and that a 20-something's probably not going to ask. But if I put myself in proximity to a 20-something and just intentionally be around, eventually relationship will trump the day, and it will naturally happen, right? And so just to speak to that, there's a few things that, like, if I were to talk and if I were to, ask guys, many of the guys that I get to, spend time with, they ask me what it means to be a husband, and they look at mine and Erica's relationship. It's not perfect, but man, it's good. We love each other 21 years later, 25 years that we've known each other, man. And it's awesome. And it's good. Not perfect. But one of the things that, like, when you asked me this, prior, I would say that one of the things that I would guard in a social media gotcha culture, in a almost loose, there seems to be no boundaries anymore as to what can be shared and what's open and all of this. One of the things that I would say that I give my wife is permission to veto. So, like, there is an accountability with my wife on things like my schedule. So, like, I can't just commit to anything that I want to without first running it past her. And we make decisions together on my time, right? And vice versa. We make those types of decisions together. We are one together. So we make decisions on our money. We make decisions on our schedule, hers and mine, and together as a family. She has permission. So, like, for me, it is so important to honor her in such a way that, like, in this area of other women, that in a schedule, so as a pastor for the last, 23 years, I never met with a woman without my wife being on that calendar invite.
That's good. So
she would know exactly who I was meeting with, where I was meeting them, in a glass window office.
That's right.
Like, she would know that that's the case. So I think the accountability around the other woman was huge to give my wife permission. And then I would say this: every time that I text a woman, I CC my wife on that text.
That's really good.
So that she knows, man, because there's so much hidden. Guys who travel, guys who are in hotels, all this stuff. Just like that, it can sneak up on you. If you do not have systems and processes of accountability with your wife, dude, temptation is crouching at your door, right? And so I just think that is something that I've learned. As Erica and I are a team together, we mean it in every area of our life. So
that's great, man. I mean, that's great. That's the first I've heard, like, someone say, you and your wife share the calendar together, and you have the opportunity to veto and say, hey, hon, that's got to go. I need your time today for this, whatever. And it does show that oneness, and that's amazing. And what I love hearing though too is how you're holding each other accountable.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, it sneaks up on you. These guys don't fall in affairs and just jump right at it. It's very few and far between. It's a process.
That's right.
And I mean, it's little little compromises that add up to the big one. So
And we
men,
do this,
yeah,
we do this in other areas of our lives, right?
absolutely.
We're so strategic with it, but when it comes to, okay, if I were to ask this question of every dude who's listening to this podcast right now, you instantly know the answer. All right. So here's the question. If you were Satan, where would you take you out? Right. Everyone
Wow.
who's listening to this knows the answer to that question. And most of the time, where we get into trouble is that we don't make a plan to fight against the area that we know that the enemy is striving to take us out. It's been a pattern our entire lives that the enemy is trying to take us out in that area. Everybody knows the answer to that question. If I was Satan, where would I take me out? And when I answer that question, I need to develop a plan. And so that's a part of mine and Erica's plan. We know exactly where the enemy will take us out. We talk about it. We make plans against the enemy to fight him because he's going to get tricky. He's going to distract us. He's going to deceive us. He's going to eventually try to divide and conquer us. And man, we've been fighting for our marriage since day one.
Yep. John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, right?
Yep.
And so you're right. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Just like, you wouldn't do it in your workplace. Like if you had your own business, you don't go in it without a plan, else you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Same way needs to be said with our marriages. We need to have a plan together. So this is good stuff, man. So we're talking about accountability now. I want to talk about accountability with men. Yeah. What is it? You talked about discipleship's a key element, in your life, and it's a key element in every man's life. We need to have that so we can live the best version of ourselves. So one, what does discipleship look like in your life for you? Mm-hmm. How do you keep yourself sharp? And secondly, why is it that men fail to seek accountability and discipleship? And what would you tell that guy that he needs to do in his life that helped you in yours?
Right. Yeah. So for me, discipleship and submitting myself to discipleship and having mentors in my life that I give permission to call me out. Mm. See, a lot of people think that friendships that friendships sort of let you slide. A true friendship, when you're following Jesus together, is going to call you out because they love you. A lot of dudes think, oh, that dude will let me slide because he loves me, right? He's not going to, hey, just let me ease up on that. No, a true friend gets in your face.
That's right.
So for me, I've got a few guys that I have given permission to call me out. They're in my inner circle. We speak often. And when they see me getting off track, they have lifetime permission to call me out. And so I think that's a part of my discipleship. For me, as far as discipling other men, I look at it like this. There's a need, I think, in our culture today to be very intentional and organized when it comes to discipleship. Because if you don't have a plan, you're not going to hit the mark. And so for me, I have been discipled by a guy by the name of Dave Buring, huge influence in my life. And he has a ministry called Lionshare where I serve on the board with him. And he has taught me that if you do not have beside your Bible a guide to walk through the ways and the character and the mission of Jesus, if you don't have a guide that's keeping you on track, you will get off track so easy. Right? And we can do relationships, and relationships are really good. But if you're not intentional being in the scriptures together, if you're not intentional of doing it on a weekly basis, it's not going to happen. Right? You're just going to watch the game together. And that's a part of discipleship, but it's not the focus. The scriptures, the character and the nature of God, getting to know his voice, knowing what it means to have the disciple of Jesus disciplines in my life. If I don't get intentional about that kind of stuff, it's just a friendship, right? And not that that's bad, but it's not discipleship. And so for me, it's very intentional, weekly, doing life together. Yeah, going to the ball games, having a great time, having families over for dinner and things like that. But there's always that weekly prioritized meeting that you cannot get out of.
That's right.
That you have to come in, and we're going to study the scriptures along with our guide that will help us stay on track together. And so Dave Buehring has mentored me in something called a discipleship journey. It's a year-long kind of workbook that helps people stay on track, because again, discipleship can't be microwaved. It's got to be crock pot, man. And so I believe that you've got to at least be together in like a year to an 18-month journey before discipleship can even really begin.
Sure.
Know? So it's all about relationships, and relationships take time together. So that for me, and I think one of the reasons that dudes don't do this is because it was never modeled for us.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And like I'm not a guy who well, I'll say it this way. There are a lot of churches, there are a lot of ministries that it's about getting people to come and see and all of this. I believe the church is at its best when it's both and. Mm-hmm. Where you are winning people to the Lord, but you are discipling them to send them right back out to win more people. It's a both and. Discipleship is at its core about introducing people to Jesus and building them up. You can't just birth a baby on the altar and leave them there, right? You have to nourish and feed that baby into mature manhood so that they can then go and do the exact same thing. So I think that another thing is there's so many pressures on a guy's time. I think now more than ever, we think that, the term, man, I'm busy is like a mark of like success.
Right.
And I have just watched as guys, their kids graduate, they leave the house, and they miss out on the opportunity to disciple their own kids because they don't have that time notched in their schedule.
Yeah.
We need to begin getting very intentional with our time. And if I put it in my calendar and I don't let anything else get in there, I know it's going to happen. And so I think that's one of the things, like, we just don't have time in this culture. But I know this, we give the time to what we value.
That's
right.
I
don't think we've been taught to value discipleship and authentic conversation with other dudes, because we haven't been taught that that's an actual man. For dudes to share their feelings, it's almost like that's a foreign concept. You think of every sitcom, you think of every movie that dads have been, kind of these aloof, people.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Man, we've got to get very intentional to recapture the man card. And a part of that man card for me is being authentic. I see that 33 series behind you, man.
Love it.
The authentic man. Yeah. Means that you're having these in-depth conversations at the heart level, because that's where the real man is. These surfacey manhood, man, I'm just talking about sports or politics or whatever. We have to talk about the things of the heart, because that's where the real man lies.
Well said, and amen to that. And yeah, I had the privilege of interviewing Tier Screen. He was part of 33, and if I can encourage any guy, kind of a little plug for 33 is dive into it, guys. It's a great tool to use as an on-ramp for guys, but it's also great for a mature believer too. So just as Kent says, we need that accountability. We need guys that iron sharpens iron. You need that guy to call you out, because the fact is we got too many buddies and not really deep, intentional relationships with men. And I'm even working on that in my own life, Kent, because, my wife and I since moved over the past year. So it's almost kind of got to do like a reshift, and then just find some other guys that I can really lean on. So I need, and, I'm slowly working that back in, because we all need that. We need that guy that will call you out.
Right.
One thing that you said is about, living that life on target, if you will. And I'll just share this analogy by Tony Evans, man. It was pretty cool. He said that kind of pictured it this way. This guy's driving up a driveway, long driveway. He shares it with his buddy who has this huge barn, and he's got these 15 targets painted on the side of the barn, and each one has a bullseye, dead center shot. So he knocks on the guy's door. He's like, how are, who shot these bullets? Because, man, they're like dead on accurate, bullseye every time. He goes, oh, I did it. He goes, I didn't know you were such a marksman. He goes, well, I'm not. What I did is I shot the holes in the barn first, and then I painted the target around it.
That's good.
And I think there's a lot of guys who are painting the target around the bullseye, kind of giving the illusion, man, that we got this all together when we don't.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. And the other thing you said is about this term being busy. And, I would preach to kids and when I did youth ministry, and this acronym that I heard, and I'm sure you heard it before, and this kind of just stayed etched in with me, man. Busy meaning being under Satan's yoke.
All right.
You know what I mean? And so if we can remind ourselves as men, we got to be careful with the words that we say.
Yep.
And what we're speaking, life and death, even in our own lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, man, we got to be careful about that stuff. So as we're getting ready to close,
sure.
I just got a couple more questions for you. One is, what do you say to the guy who's out there who's listening to this podcast? He felt like, you know what, man, it's too late. I wasted my days. This is great what Kent shared, and that's all good for him, but he's still relatively a young guy, and, man, I just can't get this going. So what do you say to that guy who can still have that Christian arena impact in his sphere of influence?
I would say it this way. If you have a pulse, there's a divine reason. Right? You're never done. You never retire from the kingdom of God. You may retire from your career, but you rewire for what God has for you.
Amen.
And I would say, to guys who say, man, I don't even know where to begin. Man, I'm 70 and how do I even begin discipleship? Here's a phrase that has been shared, from my mentor, Dave Buring, to me. Here's what he said. Look around you, and in whose ears are your words big?
Wow.
Like, let me say that again, because it was huge in my life. In whose ears are your words big? When I first started saying that, I would mess it up all the time. I was like, in whose big ears are my words? Wait, no, that's not what, yeah. But the idea is this, right? You just look around you. There are guys who, when you speak, they lean in.
Yeah.
It might just be you telling a story. It might be you recounting some memories and all this, but they want to hear more. That's the guy that God's put around you.
That's right.
Right? And he's saying, lean into that guy with the ways and character and mission of Jesus. And so I love that. And I would encourage guys who don't know where to begin to find a scripture-based tool that helps guide you. Right? Obviously, we have our scriptures, but we need a guide to help us to be able to know where to begin. And to me, honestly, like, I don't care what it is, as long as it is grounded in the scriptures, and it will help you invest relationally and intentionally in a person's life to help them multiply God's kingdom. So, man, if you've got a pulse, there's a divine use for you.
There you go. It's not too late, guys. You still have some ground to cover. If you have that pulse, there's some guys that you can still impact. It could be just one guy, right, Kent?
Absolutely.
And then the other thing I want to kind of say as it came to my mind, there's guys that you just need to eliminate, that you're probably wasting time, that you're not getting that word in them.
Right.
And you're getting discouraged at that point, like saying, am I not doing this right? Am I, you know what? He don't have the big ears that you're saying to receive that, exactly.
You think about the rich young ruler,
right?
Who came to Jesus. He didn't chase him.
Right.
The rich young ruler's like, man, how can I do it? And he was like a know-it-all, right? Sure. And Jesus said, one thing you lack, give all of this to the poor, come and follow me. And that guy was like, I'm good. Yeah. And Jesus did not chase him. He let him go. Right. And so that's exactly what you're saying, man. Some guys just need to be let go because they're a know-it-all. and they're not ready to be discipled. The people that we need to be looking to disciple are those who are faithful, those who are available. They actually have time in their calendar to be discipled.
That's right.
They're servant-hearted, man. They're teachable. Nobody wants to disciple and know it all. We shouldn't. Jesus didn't.
That's right. Amen to that. Amen to that. So, all right. So what verse does the Lord have you focused either in this season of life, or maybe he's giving you a life verse?
Yeah, dude. When I saw this question, immediately wrote down Psalm 139, 23 and 24. God has been taking me to school on this passage, no joke, for like months now. And so here's the passage. Search me, O God. This is David writing, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. I've been doing a lot of writing on this. I've been doing some video work on this, because I believe in this Twitter bombing culture, in this gotcha culture. A lot of people are just blaming tweeting blame, excuse me. They're just, and it's all about finger pointing. And I think that especially in the conversation of racism in our culture today, and the just lobbing back, we're living in trauma right now as a world. When you think of COVID, when you think of all the racism, when you think of financial, and it's everybody else's fault. One of the things that God has been taking me to school is, before I say anything, search me.
That's right.
I think it's important for us to act. I think it's important for us to have conversations about racism and all of this that's going on in our world right now. So important to do those things. But as followers of Jesus, I think that the starting point of all of this, for me, that God's teaching me, is search me, O God.
That's right.
Like, is there anything offensive in me? It's what Jesus taught us about the plank in my own eye.
That's right.
Where I pick out the speck of dust in your eye. God's been taking me to school on that big time. And so I've just been doing a ton of writing about Psalm 139 lately.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And to have that discipline in your life to even, and sometimes it's just tough to even ask the questions about our own selves to ourselves.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And just like, and to have God reveal that to you, that just to sharpen you as a man. So, all right, man. So I got one more question for you. So I know you're a representative with Athletes in Action. We talked about that. And I know we encourage athletes not to associate their identity with their sport. A lot of guys do that, right? So, but to engage in victory, even in the midst of defeat, because even though we may feel like we've lost, depending how we react to that defeat, we can actually rise above it and be victorious.
Yeah.
So with that being said, if I were to ask you the question, I experienced victory beyond competition, what would your answer be?
Yeah, I would say I experienced victory beyond competition when my family, when my wife, when my daughters are secure in their faith in Jesus Christ. When they are doing their part of expanding the kingdom of God, when I watch them pursuing Jesus with everything that they've got, that for me as a dad, as a husband, dude, that's victory, right? No, it's not about my role. It's not about how successful I am and whatever it is that I put my hand to. Victory beyond competition for me is when my family is following Jesus. Huge, huge priority in my life.
Kent, that is on point, brother, and well said. And that is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate prize that we want to see. We want to see that next generation continuing in that investment. That's the victory right there. So, Hey, man, I really appreciate your time today. And I want to give you an opportunity. If men wanted to connect with you, Ken, and learn about Kent's ministries and what he's involved with, with Trucks of Hope or Athletes in Action, how can they reach you? How can they support you?
Yeah, man. Like if you guys are on social media, hit me up on my channels, Kent Chevalier. But I would say, as far as our ministry and getting connected and partnering with us, we've developed a website. Erica and I call ourselves Team Chevalier. And so we're doing some great stuff, partnering with people, teaming with other organizations. So hit up teamchevalier.com. That's where you'll get to know more about us and our ministries. So thank you guys for doing that.
That's awesome. Kent, I appreciate your time, man, and being part of the Resolute Warrior podcast, man. It's been a blast. Dude, I could talk to you all day, man. I mean, seriously.
Same here, Rob, man. This is fun.
This has been great, man. So thanks again, man, and God bless.
You can connect with Resolute Men on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Men, stay focused and determined. Fight the good fight. Live for something bigger than yourself. And be a resolute warrior.